5 plus 2. So it's not a matter of opinion at all what the answer to a sum is. And in fact, these ideas of systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, inflation, and deflation, these three separate ideas are all of them relate unequivocally and incontrovertibly, strictly to a sum. That is, there is one and one only correct answer for solving inflation, deflation, and systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money. Inflation is an increase in circulation per goods and services or represented wealth. Deflation is a decrease in circulation per represented wealth. Very, very, very obviously, you maintain the right sum of circulation only when the circulation always equals the remaining value of represented wealth. And the only way that you do that is to pay for the consumption of the represented property at the rate at which you consume or of it, or it depreciates, which means that principal must be retired from circulation. And this is why I review this from the very roots of this whole problem, and that is to unravel the natural nature of a promise, the natural inherent nature of a promissory obligation, which is that if I promise to deliver something to you, when I deliver it, my promissory obligation is canceled from existence because it's been fulfilled. It no longer represents this indispensable obligation to deliver property. Without that obligation, no currency has any fixed value. So these things are imperative to solution, and I introduced them 40 years ago, and this proposition of inherent failure, of course, is critical to understand, because this is why the world is falling apart around us. And this further fact that these things exist strictly for the purpose of exploitation further intimates all the political improprieties of our time. So in all these things which we have to understand give us the perspective of the problems before us, which tell us exactly what we, the people, have to do. You're not going to appeal to Ron Paul or Dennis Kucinich or Barack Obama or George Bush to resolve economy on our behalf. And all of these people have been presented repeated propositions of mathematically perfected economy, and they never answer to them. And the reason is they don't represent us. They represent something else. And we have to get that straight in order to realize that all the power sits in our laps for us to do the only reasonable thing in response to the conditions which are before us, and that is this mandate, for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. I differ somewhat from Karl, but I understand Karl's sentiments. He doesn't want to put down these contending rising movements, and I know Jack is quite the mother figure to me, who, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm a fighter, and I've been doing this for 40 years, and I don't have tolerance to accommodate people in the lies that they're pursuing. After all, I fought for 30 years just to get recognition for this, and when I've provided the Reagan administration actual computer models which embody this process of what I call reflation, necessary reborrowing of principal and interest to maintain a vital circulation until at an ever-escalating rate of ever greater increments of periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt, we eventually suffer a terminal sum of debt. And I provided the Reagan administration with models of this problem. I mean, this is a result of so many years already spent at it, about 16 or 17 years at that point, 1983 or 4. That it's been proven before mathematics professors of academia. Will McPhee of the University of Colorado was one of my greatest advocates in the early 1970s, first of the 1970s. So this process was, I proved it every which way, right down to producing computer models which actually calculate the maximum possible lifespan of any purported economy based on interest-bearing debt. I invented those terms, interest-bearing debt. They're all over the internet now, with in all of these actually millions of contending websites put up by people who haven't even gone through the fundamental processes of determining the ramifications of interest, resolving them, determining the nature, inherent and indispensable nature of a promissory obligation to resolve these issues, and converting that into a solution as a software engineer would, which is my profession. As a software engineer would resolve a complex problem, accounting for every part of every cycle of the currency. And so what I think is actually criminal, I go to the extreme from Karl, and I understand and Jack shares much the same idea, actually, of diplomacy. Maybe we can unite these people. But the thing is, practically anyone that we can discuss, I'm hearing from my supporters quite a bit in the last just few hours, even over many of these people who have plagiarized my work, who are big names now in monetary reform. They've done it wrongly. They've argued with me that interest wasn't the problem. They produced purported solutions which preserved interest. Only after I argued against them for years are they morphing their position into mine, and they still have it wrong. There is one right, because this is simple arithmetic. And a good example of this, people think that this idea has been around for ages, but I've researched the nature of money, and please do not misunderstand that I pretend authority on the basis of research. That claim is preposterous, not only for myself, but for anyone else. The reason being, especially if we go far back in history, and I can trace the origins of usury and probable existence of usury in much the same obfuscation as we suffer today, to approximately 2,000 years BC in ancient Egypt. Now, the thing is, those ideas are draw from intimate perceptions of subtle references that indicate that problems may have existed, which problems can only be attributed to such an obfuscation of the currency. But in all of my research, I've never crossed a fact that anyone had actually resolved these problems before. And I don't say this simply to claim that, I'm the original identifier of the problem and the original developer of the solution. Although, in fact, just as you write a software application, that is the very process that I went through. I'm not saying it to claim that, which is I believe, a self-evident fact which is readily and certainly determinable from the sum of everyone's work. These other people who are standing up and purporting to propose solutions, in fact, have invalidated their latest solution by the prior solution that they have. And we can discuss each and every one so much as we want. But an example of this idea that everyone understands that interest is terminal, or some kind of a problem which they don't articulate well, as can only be indicated by this implicit obligation that I explain exists in this obfuscation of a promissory obligation. All the banks are doing is publishing the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. The principal should be retired. It's laundered into their possession. Then by interest and this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation, they multiply this falsified debt to the banks into terminal indebtedness. And we all ought to be jumping out of our chairs and screaming with disgust that this is happening in every government of the world, which is supposed to be a representative government. There isn't a person in any of these governments who holds an office of power who can defend this purpose lie of economy, the only powers of which and the only possible purposes of which, therefore, are exploitation, and the means of exploitation of which is terminal. And this is why the problems of the world exist to the extent they do. But so it's wrong, and Jack's the founder of the European central banks movement. And late last night he sent me a link to visit, and I did. And it's a guy who's done a fine article on his pages. It really starts out well, putting these things in perspective. But what's wrong with it is just a fine line thing that it's a mistake that any of us can make. But see, from my perspective, it's a critical mistake, because it assumes that we all understand this fault of interest, its ramifications are terminal. And yet, if we all understood that, there is no way that this would even exist at this very moment. There is no way in the world that one intelligent person in the world who understood this would abide by it, because it's terminal to them. It eventually culminates in a very short while in terminal dispossession of all of us. There's no way we would stand for this, because it is entirely comprised of injustice. There is not one part of it that is just. We do not borrow money from banks. They publish evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. But this fellow who wrote this fine article on Jack's pages, he's under the wrongful assumption that this idea that interest is damaging in one way or another is well known and has been known for a long time. Well, I've never discovered any evidence of that whatsoever, but yet, in fact, my own web pages would incline you to believe that maybe Benjamin Franklin, maybe Thomas Jefferson, maybe Abraham Lincoln understood these things. Well, that's only the best that we can assume, but you can go through the work of Franklin, of Jefferson, of Lincoln, and you do not find that they understood the costs, but they didn't understand, they hadn't unraveled and ascertained the mechanics of interest as indicates this inherent process of terminal failure. And only when you understand that can you understand some things like which Thomas Jefferson said. Thomas Jefferson, I've quoted him as a result of a speech that I heard in 1975, but academia has notified me that Thomas Jefferson never said this. And as I know, the gentleman who gave this speech to a degree it related to the nature of money. But he had many unresolved intuitions only about economy, and he was surprised to hear from a member of the audience, what the things that he had given as accounts of would have meant. And evidently,